Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Imagine a world where the very air you breathe hums with a new kind of vitality. A world where the concrete jungle is fighting a losing battle against an emerald tide, where skyscrapers are not just adorned with green, but consumed by it. Picture waking up to sunlight filtered through a canopy so dense it feels like perpetual twilight, even at noon. This isn't some distant science fiction future. This is the immediate, visceral reality we plunge into today. This is the Earth, radically transformed by one impossible, beautiful, terrifying change: photosynthesis, multiplied tenfold. The year is 2038. Sarah, a climatologist, stands on what used to be her apartment balcony in Neo-London, but now it's a precarious perch on a vast, living cliff face. Below, the Thames is no longer visible, choked by colossal water lilies with petals like solar panels, each spanning dozens of meters, their roots a tangled, vibrant new delta. The air, once heavy with exhaust and urban grit, is now so impossibly crisp, so oxygen-rich, it almost burns the lungs with every deep breath. A constant, low hum vibrates through the ground, the sound of a billion cells working overtime, converting sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into life at an industrial scale. Just last week, Sarah had to cut a path through kudzu-like vines that had spiraled up the side of her building overnight, threatening to engulf her emergency access panel. The city's ancient brickwork is crumbling under the relentless pressure of roots seeking purchase, splitting stone, and forcing their way through every crack. The emergency services aren't battling fires anymore. They're battling asterisk growth asterisk. A single dandelion can grow to the size of a small tree in a matter of days. Lawns become forests in a week. Your garden, if left untended for a mere 48 hours, will reclaim your home. This isn't just about greener cities. It's about a fundamental shift in the planet's operating system. The sky, a deeper, richer blue, is occasionally streaked with strange, high-altitude clouds, not of water vapor, but of pollen and spores from plants that have evolved at warp speed, adapting to the supercharged environment. The very asterisk of the world is different, heavier, more alive, yet also more alien. The constant hum, the omnipresent scent of chlorophyll, the feeling of an unseen, powerful force at work, it's exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly disorienting. What happens when the engine of life itself suddenly shifts into overdrive? What becomes of humanity when nature, long held at bay, decides to reclaim everything with an unstoppable, vibrant fury? How do our bodies cope with air that can feel intoxicating one moment and dangerously volatile the next? And what unforeseen consequences lurk beneath the surface of this verdant new world? We're talking about a transformation so profound, it rewrites the rules of ecology, economy, and even human existence. But to understand how we got here, how Sarah found herself on that verdant precipice, we need to rewind. We need to go back to the world we knew, the one teetering on the brink, just before the impossible became reality. To understand the sheer magnitude of what Sarah is experiencing, we first need to understand the world asterisk before. Our world, the one where photosynthesis, while miraculous, was often taken for granted. For billions of years, this fundamental process has powered nearly all life on Earth. Plants, algae, and some bacteria capture sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to create sugars for energy and release oxygen as a byproduct. It's the grand engine that built our atmosphere, fed our ancestors, and continues to sustain us. But that engine, for all its power, was always limited. Think about it. For decades, we've been locked in a desperate struggle with our planet. Climate change, driven by excess carbon dioxide from human activity, has pushed global temperatures higher, melted glaciers, and intensified extreme weather events. Our reliance on fossil fuels, the compressed remains of ancient photosynthesis, has created a carbon imbalance that threatens our very future. Simultaneously, global food security remains a pressing concern. Despite technological advancements, billions still face hunger or malnutrition. Agricultural yields, while impressive, are constantly battling against droughts, pests, and the sheer scale of human demand. We dream of a future with limitless clean energy, with abundant food for all, and with a revitalized, carbon-free atmosphere. We yearn for a way to reverse the damage we've done. Experts across the globe have long grappled with these challenges. Dr. Eris Thorne, a leading plant biologist at the fictional Global Botanical Institute, often spoke about the tantalizing potential of photosynthesis. Imagine, he'd muse in his lectures, if we could somehow unlock the full, theoretical efficiency of a plant's solar conversion. If we could bypass its evolutionary bottlenecks, its inherent limitations. The energy potential is astronomical. Carbon drawdown capabilities, world-changing. But it's always been a distant dream, a biological holy grail. He'd explain how even the most efficient plants convert only a tiny fraction of the sun's energy into biomass. The vast majority is reflected, unused, or lost as heat. This inefficiency, he argued, was the planet's choke point, the natural governor on growth and atmospheric composition. What you don't realize, living in our world, is just how delicately balanced everything is. The oxygen levels in our atmosphere are precisely tuned for our physiology and for the ignition points of common materials. Our climate systems, while volatile, operate within parameters that allow for complex ecosystems and human civilization to thrive. Our entire agricultural infrastructure, from soil science to global supply chains, is built around predictable growth cycles and yields. We have, for centuries, pushed these boundaries, but always with the underlying assumption that the fundamental biological processes of Earth would remain largely constant. We took the steady, predictable pulse of photosynthesis for granted. We yearned for a solution, a breakthrough that could pull us back from the brink. We funded research into genetically modified crops, synthetic biology, atmospheric carbon capture technologies. We envisioned grand engineering projects to rebalance our planet, all of them slow, expensive, and fraught with ethical dilemmas. But what if the solution wasn't a slow, controlled intervention, but an instantaneous, overwhelming biological revolution? What if the very process we relied upon to stabilize our world suddenly became its most destabilizing force? The tension was palpable in the late 2020s. We knew something had to give. We just never imagined it would be the plants themselves, bursting forth with an impossible, unprecedented power. The catalyst, as it so often is, was both an accident and a triumph of human ingenuity. Dr. Eris Thorne, the very scientist who dreamed of unlocking photosynthesis, was at the center of it. His team, working in a highly secured biolab deep beneath the Global Botanical Institute, had been trying for years to create a synthetic chloroplast, an artificial organelle that could perform photosynthesis with vastly increased efficiency. Their goal was modest, a 5% improvement for specific industrial applications, perhaps boosting algae biofuel production. They were not trying to transform the planet. They were merely trying to nudge it. The breakthrough came on June 12, 2038, at 07:14 GMT. A junior researcher, Maya Singh, was monitoring a newly engineered strain of *Synochocystes* algae, modified with complex synthetic genetic pathways. She'd left it under a specially calibrated light array, a test of its resilience to higher energy input. But a power surge, a freak micrometeoroid strike on a nearby solar farm, caused a momentary fluctuation in the lab's energy grid. For a fraction of a second, the light array spiked, delivering an intensity far beyond its programmed limit to Maya's algae culture. At 07:15, Maya's console flashed red. The oxygen saturation in the bioreactor shot up, not by percentages, but by orders of magnitude. The CO2 levels plummeted so fast the sensors initially registered a malfunction. The algae, instead of dying from the energy overload, had multiplied exponentially. In a single hour, the bioreactor, designed for liters, was overflowing with a dense, emerald sludge, churning with an almost violent energy. It was a biological runaway reaction. They had, inadvertently, created a superphotosynthesizer. A strain of algae that could process carbon dioxide and sunlight with unprecedented, almost terrifying efficiency, not 5% better, but nearly 10 times faster and more robust than any known natural plant. The first 24 hours were a frantic blur within the Institute. Containment protocols were initiated, but the sheer rate of growth was overwhelming. The algae produced spores, microscopic and resilient, far beyond anything their filtration systems were designed to handle. A technician, evacuating a contaminated lab, brushed against a doorframe coated with a fine green dust. Within hours, a rash appeared, then small, vibrant green shoots erupted from his skin, harmless, but growing at an alarming speed before they could be excised. It was a stark, visceral demonstration of the organism's potency. The spores were airborne. They were everywhere. By 07:14 GMT on June 13th, the first reports started trickling in from outside the Institute. A farmer in rural England called his local agricultural extension, bewildered by an overnight explosion of growth in his wheat fields. "It's like something out of a time-lapse video, but in real time," he stammered, describing stalks that had grown several feet taller since dusk, their heads heavy with grain. In the Amazon, indigenous communities reported an unprecedented burst of new flora, thick vines strangling ancient trees at an alarming pace. Even in the arid landscapes of the Australian outback, dormant seeds seemed to burst forth, carpeting the red earth in a shimmering, ephemeral green. The global atmosphere began to register the change. Satellite data, usually analyzed for slow, incremental shifts, showed a dramatic dip in atmospheric carbon dioxide. Simultaneously, oxygen levels began a slow, inexorable climb, a phenomenon that initially delighted climate activists, unaware of the terrifying engine behind it. Within 48 hours, the vibrant green dust, the superspores, had hitched rides on jet streams, carried by winds across continents. Every fertile patch of earth, every speck of moisture, became a crucible for this new, hyper-efficient life. Personal stories emerged like wildfire across social media. A retired couple in Vancouver watched their meticulously manicured rose garden transform into an impenetrable thicket of thorny, impossibly large blooms, their petals the size of dinner plates, within a single afternoon. The roses were beautiful, overwhelming, and utterly alien. A young boy in Mumbai, tending a small balcony garden, awoke to find his single tomato plant had scaled the entire side of his building, its fruit ripening in a matter of hours, almost glowing with an internal luminescence. These were moments of wonder, yes, but also of profound unease. The world was changing, not over centuries or decades or even years, but minute by minute, hour by hour. And humanity, for the first time in a very long time, was utterly, thrillingly, terrifyingly passive in its wake. This was just the beginning. The first 30 days were a dizzying descent into a new kind of planetary chaos. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and escalating crises. Initial reactions from some environmental groups were celebratory, believing humanity had finally found its salvation. News anchors breathlessly reported on plummeting CO2 levels, hailing it as the answer to climate change. But the celebration was short-lived, quickly drowned out by the screams of a world struggling to breathe and literally to move. Within a week, global oxygen levels had risen by several percentage points. While a slight increase might seem beneficial, the rapid surge began to have unexpected and dangerous consequences. Fire departments worldwide reported an unprecedented increase in flash fires. A small kitchen grease fire that would normally be contained in minutes now erupted into an inferno, fueled by the superoxygenated atmosphere. Entire forests, once damp and resilient, became tinderboxes, exploding into raging conflagrations with a single spark. Firefighting became a near-impossible task, as the very air itself became an accelerant. Imagine the terror of a small campfire becoming a deadly, uncontrollable blaze in seconds. The human body, too, began to react. Some people reported an initial burst of energy, a feeling of enhanced clarity and vigor, as their cells received an unprecedented oxygen supply. Athletes found their endurance dramatically increased. But for others, especially those with pre-existing respiratory or cardiovascular conditions, the increased oxygen saturation led to dizziness, nausea, and even hyperoxia, a condition where excessive oxygen can damage cellular tissue. Hospitals overflowed, not with victims of climate change, but with those overwhelmed by its radical reversal. Doctors scrambled to understand what was happening to the human physiology when the fundamental atmospheric composition changed so rapidly. Agriculture, initially seen as the biggest beneficiary, quickly became a new front in the crisis. Crop yields exploded. Fields that would normally produce a single harvest in a season now yielded 3 or 4. The problem wasn't scarcity, it was abundance asterisk on an unimaginable scale. Storage facilities quickly filled to capacity. Global food prices plummeted, collapsing economies dependent on agricultural exports. Farmers, once heroes, were now overwhelmed, their machinery unable to keep up with the relentless growth. What do you do when your fields produce more food in a week than you can harvest, process, or sell in a year? Vast quantities of food began to rot, creating new ecological nightmares of pest infestations and rampant decomposition. But the most visible, tangible change was the relentless, unstoppable march of the hypervegetation. The superspores, once dispersed, found purchase everywhere. Roads cracked and buckled under the force of massive root systems. Buildings were rapidly engulfed by incredibly strong, fast-growing vines and mosses. Utility lines were severed by plant matter. Cities became green mazes, requiring constant, arduous clearing efforts. Construction crews, instead of building new infrastructure, were repurposed into ecological cleanup squads, battling an enemy that regenerated faster than they could cut it back. What was once a vibrant urban park could become an impassable jungle in less than a month. Governments were paralyzed, then fractured. Some nations, particularly those in resource-rich but economically struggling regions, saw this as an opportunity. They declared their vast, new biomass reserves as national treasures, seeking to exploit the endless supply of organic matter for new forms of bioenergy or construction materials. Other, more developed nations struggled simply to maintain order, their highly structured societies ill-equipped to handle such radical, unpredictable change. The initial optimism evaporated, replaced by a grim determination to survive in a world where the very ground beneath their feet and the air in their lungs was actively, relentlessly, redefining reality. Before I tell you about the shocking geopolitical shifts and societal transformations that followed, you need to understand how humanity began to adapt to the sheer physical reality of living in a 10x world. Wait until you hear what happens next. As the immediate chaos of the first 30 days subsided, giving way to a new, unsettling rhythm, the ripple effect of 10x photosynthesis began to reshape society in ways no one could have predicted. The world settled into a bizarre, verdant new normal, a constant negotiation between human civilization and an overwhelmingly fertile Earth. Let's look at 5 ways society completely transformed. First, urban symbiosis and retreat asterisk. Cities became battlegrounds. The initial attempts to fight back the growth were futile. Bulldozers, chemical defoliants, nothing worked against plants that grew back stronger and faster. The solution wasn't eradication, but integration. Architects and engineers began designing living cities, structures that actively incorporated and managed the hypergrowth. Buildings were reinforced with bioresistant alloys, and their facades became vertical farms, fed by nutrient-rich runoff from the plant masses. Entire districts were abandoned to the green, becoming wild, oxygen-rich reserves, while others were meticulously managed, their surfaces constantly pruned and controlled by automated drones and biomaintenance teams. The concept of urban sprawl became obsolete. Humanity either learned to live with the green or was consumed by it. Imagine waking up to a tree growing through your bathroom wall, not as a disaster, but as a minor inconvenience to be trimmed by a trained specialist. Second, the Great Carbon Shift and Energy Revolution. With atmospheric CO2 levels plummeting, in some regions even approaching dangerously low concentrations for certain biological processes, the climate crisis, as we knew it, was largely averted. But a new energy crisis emerged. Fossil fuels became relics, their carbon content now an invaluable resource to be conserved rather than burned. The sheer volume of biomass, however, presented an unprecedented opportunity. Bioenergy became dominant. Massive, specialized fungal farms were developed to rapidly break down excess plant matter, producing methane, ethanol, and other biofuels. Entire industries pivoted from mining ancient carbon to harvesting and processing the planet's continuous, living energy output. This led to a dramatic redistribution of wealth and power, away from oil-rich nations and towards countries with vast, fertile land masses and the infrastructure to manage supergrowth. Third, food is free and dangerous asterisk. The era of food scarcity ended abruptly. Calories were abundant, almost limitless. Malnutrition, however, persisted, but in a new form. The rapid growth of plants often meant a decrease in nutrient density in some species, as the plants prioritized biomass over complex nutrient synthesis. Furthermore, the speed of plant evolution meant new, hyper-efficient strains were constantly emerging, some of which were toxic or caused severe allergic reactions. The global food industry transformed from production to identification, testing, and safe processing. Entire scientific fields emerged dedicated to phytomonitoring, constantly tracking and cataloging the ever-changing plant kingdom. The concept of a wild foraging became a high-stakes gamble. Fourth, the oxygen paradox and human adaptation asterisk. The elevated oxygen levels continued to challenge human physiology. While general vitality increased for many, the risk of oxidative stress and rapid cellular aging became a serious concern. Humanity began to adapt. Specialized atmospheric regulators became common in homes and workplaces, filtering the air to maintain optimal oxygen levels. Genetic research accelerated, exploring ways to enhance human antioxidant defenses or even modify lung capacity. Humanity found itself in a paradoxical situation. The air was cleaner than ever, yet it required active management to remain safe. This pushed medical science to its absolute limits, revealing both the fragility and the remarkable adaptability of the human body. And fifth, the psychology of the green world asterisk. Perhaps the most profound shift was psychological. Humanity's relationship with nature was fundamentally redefined. No longer was nature something to be controlled, conquered, or even merely conserved. It was a dominant, living entity, a force that demanded respect, constant vigilance, and a new kind of coexistence. Wilderness, once remote, was now at everyone's doorstep, sometimes even inside their homes. Art and philosophy grappled with this new symbiosis. Awe, fear, respect, and a profound sense of humility permeated human culture. Children grew up learning to identify fast-growing, potentially dangerous plant species as readily as our children learn traffic signs. This wasn't merely a backdrop. It was the main character in the story of human existence. These transformations weren't linear or peaceful. There were resource wars over the last remaining tracts of easily managed, fertile land. There were ethical debates over genetic modifications to humans for oxygen tolerance. There were radical philosophical movements that advocated for humanity's complete surrender to the green. But through it all, humanity, stubborn and resilient, found a way to carve out a new existence, to navigate the emerald tide, always wondering what new surprise the relentless, hyper-efficient Earth would spring next. But here's where it gets really interesting, as we look at the world 1 year later and truly understand the cost and the miracle of this radical transformation. 1 year later, the world is unrecognizable, yet strikingly familiar in its new, vibrant way. Sarah, our climatologist, stands not on a precarious balcony, but on a carefully managed, elevated walkway winding through what was once New London. The cityscape beneath her is a breathtaking fusion of steel, glass, and living, breathing plant matter. Skyscrapers, no longer just buildings, are now vast, integrated ecosystems, their upper levels still housing human residences and offices, while their lower and middle floors have been surrendered to colossal, engineered, Green lungs, massive botanical installations that filter air, produce food, and manage the supergrowth. It's a testament to human ingenuity, a forced evolution of our urban planning. The air, though still oxygen-rich, is more stable. Scientists like Sarah have learned to predict growth surges, to identify the most potent new strains, and to develop countermeasures. Atmospheric regulation technologies are now standard, from personal air filters to citywide ventilation systems that subtly adjust oxygen levels. Humanity, always the adaptable species, has found a new physiological equilibrium, though the long-term effects of constant high oxygen on human longevity and disease remain a subject of intense research. The global population has shifted dramatically. Coastal cities, particularly those with low elevations, were the first to be overwhelmed by rampant aquatic vegetation and rising biomass levels. Land, higher ground became prime real estate, leading to a massive internal migration and the construction of new vertically oriented megacities. Agriculture now takes place largely in highly automated, climate-controlled vertical farms or in vast, managed outdoor bioreserves, where specialized teams use advanced robotics to harvest and monitor the hyper-efficient crops. The concept of a small, family farm is a nostalgic relic. The emotional payoffs are complex. The fear of climate catastrophe, once a looming shadow, has receded, replaced by a new, more immediate fear of being engulfed. The anxiety of resource scarcity has been supplanted by the challenge of managing overwhelming abundance. Families no longer worry about where their next meal will come from, but rather if the wild, untamed greens encroaching on their homes are safe to touch, or if the oxygen levels in their neighborhood are stable enough for their elderly relatives. Yet there are undeniable benefits. The air is pristine, the water purer than it has been in centuries. The sheer beauty of the hyperverdant world is undeniable. A kaleidoscope of impossible greens, bioluminescent flora that lights up nights, and new species of animals that have adapted to this supercharged environment. Children grow up with an innate understanding of botany, a respect for the power of the living world that was lost to previous generations.